David and Goliath. The boy who defeated a giant. Have you ever stood at the bottom of a really tall building and felt incredibly small? Well, let me tell you about a time when being small turned out to be exactly what God needed. Picture this: an entire army of grown warriors cowering behind rocks and shields. What could scare such brave soldiers? The answer stomped across the battlefield every morning, shaking the ground with each step. His name was Goliath, and he was the most terrifying giant anyone had ever seen. But this isn't really a story about a giant. It's about a shepherd boy who discovered that when you have God on your side, there's no such thing as too small. The morning sun cast shadows across the valley of Elah, where two armies faced each other. On one side stood Israel's army with bronze shields glinting. On the other, the Philistines waited like hungry wolves. For 40 days, the same terrifying routine had played out. The ground would tremble, soldiers would grab weapons with shaking hands, and Goliath would appear. The giant emerged like a walking mountain. At over 9 feet tall, his bronze armor caught sunlight and threw it back in blinding flashes. His massive spear looked like it could pierce stone walls. "Israelites," Goliath's voice boomed like thunder. "Choose a man to fight me. If he wins, we'll serve you. But when I win, you'll serve us." His laughter rolled across the battlefield, and behind their shields, warriors whispered anxiously. "Look at the size of him," breathed one soldier. "Who could possibly stand against such a monster?" muttered another. King Saul felt his heart sink. Not one soldier stepped forward. What the king didn't know was that God was preparing an answer, but it wouldn't come from his army. It would come from the hills of Bethlehem, from a boy who spent his days watching sheep. Far from the battlefield, in peaceful Bethlehem hills, David sat with his sheep, his harp strings dancing under his fingers. At just a teenager, he was Jesse's youngest son, with eyes that sparkled with quiet confidence. "The Lord is my shepherd," David sang softly. The sheep gathered closer, finding comfort in his presence. This boy had risked his life protecting them from lions and bears, not through his own strength, but because he trusted God completely. When his 3 older brothers came to join King Saul's army, David wanted to go too. "You're too young," Eliab said kindly. "Someone needs to watch the sheep." Jesse placed a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "Don't be discouraged, my son. God has a plan for each of us. Sometimes the smallest person can do the biggest things when they trust in the Lord." David nodded thoughtfully, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove. Days later, Jesse called David from the fields. "Take this food to your brothers at the army camp. See how they're doing and bring me back news." David's heart leaped with excitement. He loaded supplies and set out, his shepherd's staff in one hand and leather sling across his shoulder, tools he never traveled without. At the valley of Elah, David left his supplies and hurried toward the battle line, searching for his brothers. Suddenly, a trumpet sounded, and the army moved forward. But instead of charging, they formed a defensive line and stared across the valley with fear. Then David heard it. Thum, thum. Thum. Goliath emerged, and David's mouth fell open. The giant's voice filled the world. "I defy the armies of Israel! Give me a man to fight!" David watched in shock as grown warriors backed away, some actually shaking. "Why isn't anyone fighting him?" David asked a nearby soldier. The man looked at him like he was crazy. "Fight him? Look at the size of him! No one can defeat that giant!" But David didn't see an impossible enemy. He saw a man mocking the army of the living God. In his shepherd's heart, righteous anger began to burn. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David's voice rang out clear and strong. Everyone stared at him. Eliab pushed through the crowd, embarrassed. "David, what are you doing here? I know your pride. You came only to watch the battle." But David's eyes remained fixed on where Goliath had stood. "The same God who delivered me from lions and bears will deliver me from this Philistine." Word spread quickly about the fearless shepherd boy. Soon David stood before King Saul himself. "You cannot fight him," Saul said gently, seeing David's youth. "You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David stepped forward, eyes bright with unshakable faith. "Your Majesty, when a lion carried off my sheep, I went after it and killed it. When a bear attacked my flock, I rescued the lamb and killed the bear too. This Philistine will be like them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." King Saul looked into David's eyes and saw something he'd almost forgotten: pure faith. "Go," Saul said finally, "and may the Lord be with you." Saul's servants brought royal armor, but David couldn't move in the heavy gear. "I cannot go in these, because I'm not used to them." He kept his shepherd's staff and simple sling, the tools God had taught him to use. At a stream, he chose 5 smooth stones, testing their weight. One would soon change history. Goliath looked down at David and laughed like boulders rolling downhill. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds." But David stood firm as a cedar tree. "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, whom you have defied." The words echoed across the battlefield, and Goliath stopped laughing. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. The battle belongs to the Lord." David placed a stone in his sling as Goliath charged toward him with a roar, but David ran fearlessly toward the giant. The sling whirred faster and faster. At the perfect moment, David released the stone. It flew in a perfect arc, guided by God's hand, and struck Goliath in the center of his forehead with a sharp crack. For one impossible moment, the giant stood frozen. Then, like a great tree falling, Goliath crashed to the ground with such force that the earth shook. The Israelites roared with joy, rushing into the valley. The Philistines fled in terror. David stood over the fallen giant, not with pride, but with quiet awe at what God had accomplished through him. David's story isn't about size or strength. It's about faith. Faith that sees God as bigger than any problem, any fear, any giant. David was small, but his God was mighty. David was young, but his faith was unshakable. David was just a shepherd, but he served the King of Kings. That's the wonderful truth about God's kingdom. He doesn't always choose the tallest or strongest. Sometimes he chooses a shepherd boy with a sling and a heart full of faith. The next time you face your own giant, a bully, a difficult test, a family problem, or anything that seems too big, remember David in the valley. The same God who guided that small stone is with you too. Because the battle belongs to the Lord, and with him on your side, no giant stands a chance. Little children, you are from God and have overcome them, for he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. 1 John 4:4. The end